Right. So today we're going to be making some marble bases similar to this model I've done here for my Emperor's Children. I want to outfit the rest of the squad with a similar design. Now, what I was going for here was a marble tile look that also has this kind of blood effect going on that kind of comes across in different ways. One thing I really wanted to do was have the blood as if it's pooling in the grout between the tiles, and at the same time to have two different effects. One, this kind of dried blood effect that's made by using an oil wash, and on the other hand, this kind of thicker gore effect that I use using Mod Podge Dimensional Magic mixed with acrylic red paint, and that way I can get multiple textures. But at the same time, you need to get the marble texture on the base. We're going to go over that as well. So I'm going to start from the beginning and we're going to cut out the other bases for the models in this squad and then apply some of the techniques to make the marble base. So the first thing I use is a sheet of polystyrene. For this one, I'm going about 0.5 millimeter thick. I like this because it's thick enough that we can scribe in the lines to make um, these different tiles pretty separate and have it deep enough that we can run in the oil wash to make the blood effect. But at the same time, it's not too thick so as to be hard to cut or manipulate. Now, for this first one, what I did was I actually took the sheet and I glued the base on, and then I proceeded to cut it out and clean it up with a hobby knife. But I also found recently that I had this rotary cutter tool from Daiso, which is kind of like a Japanese like dollar store that's become more popular in the US. So I'm going to be using that today, but I'm also going to show both ways to do it. That way, depending on what you have, because you might not have one of these, but this is certainly quicker if you do. Okay. So for the first one, we want to cut out a base that's about a similar size. So I have this base I've worked on a model from the squad with. Open the rotary cutter. It's a little hard to see. Let me adjust my camera. So in here, you can see there's some lines that'll let us adjust the measurement here. So we're going to set it to 30 millimeters, which is the size of this base. Um, I was a little surprised. I never realized when they said the size of the base that it's actually the radius and not the diameter of the base. So this will be from the center of the circle. So I'm going to get it at just about 30 and lock it down. Then I'm going, as you can see, I can kind of measure the distance from the cutter to this base. Now this might be just a bit wider than what we need. So I'm gonna take it down just a fraction of a millimeter. Take it down like that. Try again. Okay. This seems to be about just the right size. So I'm going to take the polystyrene I have here. So you have the base like that. So I'm going to put the cutter in the center here and attempt to carefully cut a circle. Now, one thing I did find, I was worried that this blade wouldn't be able to easily cut through the polystyrene because it can't apply too much force, kind of moving it like a compass. But once you have it, it's a little hard to see. You can actually just kind of snap off the edges like this. So I'm going to take my hobby knife and roughly cut out this square. Now we can kind of pop out the circle that we've cut with the rotary cutter. And here, I'm just going to clean up the top of this a little bit. And there we have it, our circular base. You'll notice that there is this little small mark in the center from the rotary cutter, but I've actually found that's not too hard to clean up. Okay, so if you take just a little piece of a fine sandpaper, like in this case, I'm using about 1,000 grit, and you go over the center of both sides, you'll find that the side where it was on the bottom of the polystyrene sheet actually will mostly hide that circle. And when you do the other effects as well, it'll be difficult to tell, especially after painting. So now what I'm going to do is go ahead and show you how to cut the lines that we're going to use to make the marble base. Again, this is what we're going for here. So we're going to make it look like there's a couple tiles, but one thing I want to change from this first model is to not have the tiles line up perfectly at this kind of four-way intersection, but have them offset like 50%. So I'm going to go back to the one that I have glued to the base, which will be this one. And then I have a scribing tool I have here that I'm going to use to cut those straight lines to help make the indentations for the tiles. Now, the size chisel I'm using with the scribing tool here is, let me see, 0.4 millimeters. It's on there very tiny. And then I'm going to use some special scribing tape. I tried a hack that somebody said where you can use the Dymo tape, like the label maker tape, but I found that it didn't have enough adhesive and it would tend to move as I used it. And it really wasn't great for guiding the lines that I was going to use to scribe. So you see here, I just like to put a little on my cutting mat and then cut it straight with my knife. Then on the base, I'm going to go ahead here and apply a straight line just slightly off center. This is going to be our first tile. Okay. Make sure that's secured down pretty well. Okay. I'll hold it up so you can see it. So you get that. And then this tape isn't super thick, but it has a thickness that will help us guide the length of the chisel. Now, this process is a little bit difficult because the first time you pass the chisel along the edge, there's nothing to guide it except that thin piece of tape, and it will want to stray off course. And whatever path you set with kind of your first path will be something that the chisel continues to follow as you dig it deeper. One thing I will say, if there's a slight wobble, which my first one did, when you go to apply an effect for like the grout, I did a blood effect, but you could also do like a darker wash in between the tiles. It actually was able to kind of cover up that wobble just enough that it didn't look too bad. So I'm going to follow this tape. I'm going to get a feel for it. Go slowly the first time. Okay, that pass went really well. So then I continue to make passes, carefully following the line I'm making. You see it's getting a little bit deeper there. When I did my test one, I actually did quite a few passes because I liked the grout to appear somewhat deep. That way I could really get a nice texture with the color and the flow of the oil wash. What's great is that if you can get your first pass fairly straight, it's very easy to continue scribing the line. Okay. I think that'll be deep enough. So I'm going to take the scribing tape off, and we're going to choose a new piece for this tile. I don't think it would look nice if it goes kind of directly across the center, so I'm going to set it near the top. I feel like you could be more accurate with this, but I just got to eyeball about a 90-degree angle from the first one, and I can adjust it. Also note, I might have to get a new piece of tape. I have found that sometimes the scribing tape will stick enough with the second time, but sometimes it won't. Okay. I think If I adjust it just a little bit further down, there, I think that's the 90-degree angle I want. So this time, instead of going all the way across, I'm just going to do the right side of the line here. And that will allow me to create a tile on the right. And then I'll do the second tile on the left side near the bottom. That will make the tiles look offset. So again, I'm going to get my chisel and attempt to follow that line closely. I'm going to get a feel for it. Okay. First one went pretty well. And start digging it a little deeper. I actually got into scribing by doing Gundam models, and I was really impressed with the way that people scribe custom panel lines on the Gundams. When I first went to attempt it, it turned out horribly, and I felt pretty frustrated. I think part of that was because the Gundam pieces were somewhat small. They do have some curvature to them, and it was much harder to do a straight line. So I began to practice on pieces of polystyrene just like this, and I started to feel much more confident. And I think that combined with getting the real scribing tape actually helped me achieve some pretty good results. And now I feel like I'm able to use that in several different hobby situations, which is nice because I can kind of vary my techniques. So now, look at this. We have the beginning of our marble tile. I'm going to get another piece of tape. I just want to ensure that the second one sticks well. So again, I like to kind of stick it to my cutting mat I work on and pick up the corner with the knife. Okay. Now I'm going to try to achieve another 90-degree angle, but this time at the bottom of the base. Okay. Let's see how that turned out. That looks pretty close to the top one for me. I think the top one might have been just a little bit off 90 degrees, but if the second one matches, I'll feel pretty confident. Make sure that's stuck down well. So I did a little test for myself while we were doing this model, and I tried scribing with the tape facing me, being between the line I'm scribing and myself, and then trying the tape facing away from me. And I feel that I'm getting better results when the tape is between me and the line I'm scribing. I feel like naturally you want to pull your hand maybe closer toward yourself. And so if there was going to be an error, instead it'll get stopped by the tape. Whereas if you're holding it the other way around, the tape would not be there to stop the way you naturally want to pull, and you might end up straying like into the open area of the plastic, and then you kind of get an ugly line. This one is going well. I think I just didn't get it all the way to the crease of the first one. I want it to be open. Okay, I think that's looking pretty good. I'm gonna take the tape off. I had a little bit of a wobble up here, but I think that'll be okay. Can clean up this edge a little bit. And then I'm gonna do one pass with the 1000 grit sandpaper. I'm just gonna turn it upside down. That kind of helps smooth the edges. And then I'm gonna very slowly, so I don't wanna dig them any deeper, but I wanna dig out the material that I just sanded off. And that will help get a smoother line. Okay. Put that. Perfect. Now, you see we have the beginning of the tiles for our bases. That's kind of the mechanical part done, and now it'll be to the painting technique to get that marble texture. So what I'm gonna do is show you a common technique you can find online pretty well, but I did find is kind of the best method. Oddly enough, what you'll need is a dried out baby wipe. Now, the material that these are made out of, when stretched, begins to take on this kind of, I don't know, this organic texture in a way that is also has some kind of uniformity. It's not completely random because the grain of the tissue runs across here. So when you stretch it this way, it's very strong. And when you stretch it side to side, it starts to fall apart. So you can kind of stretch out until it starts becoming more and more transparent. And you get this kind of random cottony texture. But if you straighten it out just a little bit, what it creates are gaps in here that follow a straight line. And that's similar to the way that the impurities in a piece of marble might follow a certain pattern where the layers of the earth like squash them in the stone. And so what you're going to do is mask off each portion of the base that we cut here. And then you're going to lay this here, and we're going to use the airbrush to get an effect of different marble striations for each section to make them look like separate tiles. So before we actually use that, I'm going to go ahead and take some masking tape. And we're going to make a couple pieces so that we can cover up the different tiles we're using. So I like to retain one of the pre-cut edges on the tape to keep it fairly straight. So we cut like that. And we're going to cut maybe another one like that. So I'm going to take this tape here and just we'll choose one of the sections we already cut. Probably the biggest one first. Cover that up well. It's okay if you cover up or leave that scribed line available because you'll end up filling that with something in the end to give some depth to the tile. And then I'm going to take another piece of tape. We're going to cover up the last remaining bit we left here at the bottom. Perfect, just like that. Okay, I then have, let me get this situated. I have my airbrush ready to go. I have an Iwata Revolution CR. I got this a long time ago. I think it was kind of a mid-range airbrush for the time, but I feel that it has worked very well for me for many years, and I've used it in many hobby projects. So I don't think your choice of airbrush matters too much, though I got one with a slightly wider nozzle than other people might prefer for miniatures at this size, for like a Warhammer miniature. And that was because I did want to do some Gundam models as well. I wanted to do some larger pieces. And in order to do that, I needed to be able to spray a little bit wider of a cone. But at the same time, it still has the precision to do smaller models like this. So don't worry about it too much. So what I'm actually going to do is, this may seem counterintuitive, but bear with me. We're going to start with a black primer. You'll see many people start with white primer, and I can understand, but I feel that sometimes with me, especially when I'm starting on a light surface like this white polystyrene, it's hard to tell when I've had enough coverage to really create that foundation layer. But at the same time, I'll end up, I feel like white primers tend to lift off easier later. I think if it's the first coat on the model, you don't seem to get as good a results. So I like to start with the black primer. And actually for this, I was a little bit ahead of myself. I'm going to take off the masking tape because we're going to prime the whole base, but we can leave this to the side and it'll keep it shaped. So when I do the airbrush, I always keep a cheapy brush that I use to mix paint in the pot. Some people you'll see will do the thing where they stop up the end and force air back into the cone. That works well, but I found that a little bit of manual mixing helps even more. And then especially when cleaning out between colors. So starting with my airbrush, we'll shake up our primer. I'm going to put just a few drops because we're not doing too much today. And then I'm going to put just a couple drops of this thinner here. I also use a brush when mixing my airbrush paint because I like to check the consistency. It's going to be a little hard to see here, but when I bring the paint up on the side, I don't like it to be too thick or too thin, and I can really tell by how fast it flows down again. If anything, this mix came out a little bit thin, and I think that's okay. So I'm going to mix that together. We got a little bit paint splatter on here already, but that's okay. So I like to test a little bit of the paint. Seems to be working well. Now I'm just going to do a simple pass until we get good coverage here. I'm not going to worry about doing the sides of the base because I can paint those later when I paint the base rim. Excuse me. I also think that sometimes when you apply white over black with the airbrush, you'll get really good coverage, but there'll be just a little bit of a grayness to it, and I think that'll help with the marble texture we're looking to achieve. I'm gonna do one more pass here. I think that's looking pretty good. I have a little bit of paint left, so I might do a little bit on the base rim. I don't think it's imperative to paint the side, but what I think is that it'll help prevent there from being kind of an unpainted edge later. When we go to do some of the effects, it'll be bad if there's not like a base layer there before we paint the base rim at the very end. Okay, so that looks really good. Now, I'm going to go ahead and clean the airbrush. I like to use these sour cream containers. Now, I've used various methods of cleaning over the years, but what I've ultimately settled on for the quickest results is I take a pipette and I squeeze it into the pot of the airbrush and then take it in and out a couple times. And what that allows me to do is break up any paint that has dried in the very bottom of the airbrush. And you'd think that it wouldn't do that because that paint has kind of been underneath the other paint the whole time. But the issue is that it'll get there and it'll kind of clog up the channel at the bottom. So once you do that, you've kind of eliminated the hardest to reach area. I like to just spray some paint into a paper towel. You can dump some water into your dirty water pot. And then I like to just completely clean out the center with my paper towel. Get a little bit of clean water. And then just flush out the rest. When it looks pretty clean inside, I just kind of dump out the excess, run air through it till it's dry, and move on. One thing you can do is run air through the airbrush to help dry. Okay. Now, that is looking pretty good. To add our white, I'm going to go ahead and use some of this Pro Acryl Bold Titanium White. I have the Vallejo white primer, but I found that is the one that I think really doesn't come out well. It just kind of creates this thick layer that'll peel off, even if you try to paint it thinly. And I don't like to have to deal with that ultimately. So I'm going to apply a little bit of this in here. If this were on a model, I actually use white ink instead of white paint. It'll come out thin, but with a very good consistency for covering up what you've done while still not clogging your airbrush, which can be a real problem with white paint. But I feel that the Pro Acryl formula, it does a little bit better now than the Vallejo. I'm gonna mix this together. You'll notice I still had a little bit of black paint on that brush, but it's okay because, like, again, a marble texture won't be, I mean, it can be, but often won't be like a pure white. To some extent, there'll be a grayish to it, and then you'll have the darker gray striations. And I guess that will help your base have a little bit more visual interest than just being kind of like a pure white marble. White's a little harder to thin, so I'm just gonna do a thing here and do a test, see how it comes out. Okay, made it a little thin. I don't like to waste paint, but I'm gonna add a little bit more. This should help ensure we have a good coverage and a good consistency. Okay. Perfect. Now you can see that if we hover in one area too long, we'll start to get too wet. But when we go quickly, the paint dries right away. That's something that'll help us make sure that our paint doesn't spread away with the air because it's too liquidy, but it also doesn't clog our airbrush. So now you can go ahead and just apply a thin coat. Now, if you wanted to do something that was more like a stone texture, like say this was like in a dungeon or something, you actually could use this black and white technique to get an interesting pattern here on the stone. Like, let's try this just for fun. Like if you do something like this, you can add more white paint to the tiles and leave it a little bit darker around the ridges that you've cut, and that can create kind of an interesting, quick stone effect. I'm just kind of looking at each tile, gradually building it up. Okay. All right, that's looking pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and clean out the white paint. Okay, so now we've cleaned out our airbrush again, and we can move on in a minute to doing the marble texture. I'm going to let the white dry for just a second. Like I said, the white can peel a little bit easier than other colors, so we don't want to move too quickly with this. Let me see. We need to choose a gray that we're going to use. I've been enjoying, I think it's Dark Warm Gray by Proaquil. Let me see if I can pull out this color so we can use it. Here we go. Dark Warm Gray. I like this one because I feel like the warmth gives a kind of a more interesting look to the model than just kind of pure black or some of the other grays. I have some cool grays, but because they tend to be more bluish, I think they'll sometimes contrast with other elements in a way that I don't like them to. But I think that the dark warm gray has become my favorite gray for highlighting black, and it's also kind of my favorite gray for when I need something like this marble texture to be dark, but not completely black. I feel that if you look at the bottle, it looks very dark. But actually, when you compare it with black, it tends to be brighter than you think. And then I think in that regard, it can be lightened with white or like a cream color very well to get kind of a richer, lighter gray if you want that as well. Okay. So it feels like the base here isn't tacky anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and put on our tape again. Okay. So now that we have the model ready to go, we can kind of start piecing together how we're going to do our texture. So what I like to do is pick a direction. I think I'm going to go kind of across like this so we can take advantage of this large space, but not have it look perpendicular to our other lines. So I'm going to cover up this part of the base, but I want the line in the dried tissue to go the direction that we want to see the texture appear on the base. So I think maybe something like this. Okay. I'm going to pull that fairly tight. And then we're going to put some of that dark warm gray in the airbrush. Okay. And a little bit of thinner. We might want this one to be a little bit more thin and apply it very slowly. That way we can control how much of the texture we want. You might even want to spray some, check, maybe move the tissue a little bit to get a little bit more variety, and then try again. I do feel that when you do it for the first time, it might appear a little bit darker than you like, but when you look at the whole model together at the end, it'll be just right. So I'm going to take this tissue and I'm going to do a thin layer of gray. Now let's check and see what it looks like and if we need to do more. Ooh, that actually looks pretty good, but I think I would like it to be just a bit darker. So I'm going to do another pass. And we're going to open up some of the grain in the tissue a little bit more. So like I said, if you go across the grain of the tissue, you can get these kind of wider holes. So we'll try that again. Make sure we line up in a similar direction. Okay, I'm going to do a second pass. Well, that looks really good. That's exactly what I was trying to go for. So if you compare that with our example model, you can see that we got the grain of one of the tiles done. And now we can try doing some of the other tiles. Very carefully peel off our masking tape. And we'll go for another one. This time, I think we'll do the top tile here. And we'll make sure to have this going a different direction than the first one. Okay, so now, as you can see with the example model, we want to have a different marble pattern on each of the tiles to look like they were cut from different slabs. So we've done the first square and we're going to do the second, but we can do the same process pretty quickly now. We're going to cover up the piece of the model we want, but we're going to, again, pull the tissue so that we get the grain going in the direction that we'd prefer. And I want it to be a different direction than the first square we did. That way we have some interesting variety between the tiles. So I'm going to go ahead and apply another quick pass of the dark warm gray. See what we got. I think that looks pretty good. It looks quite a bit different from our first one. So if we now compare them side by side, you notice that here, the grain of this one largely goes left and right. And I got the grain of this one to kind of go slightly off from the other side. And that'll make these tiles look like individual pieces of marble. This one's going a little bit darker than the one I did before, but I think that will be okay. Among the squad, I think having a slightly different texture will help break them up a little bit. And I feel that because marble's supposed to be a natural thing, I want it to look like it has some variety. Okay. So now we're going to mask off this last portion here and do the second big piece of the tile. Now for this, we want to choose something that we can use to create a texture that'll be different than the other two. So I might actually open up a new part of the tissue. We can see if we can get a different pattern. This one I might want to be a little bit less gray, a little bit tighter in the grain, and have more of the texture. Maybe even like this. It's hard to see, but this side is a little bit more open, and this side has more of the grain. So when we go over it with the airbrush, we'll get an interesting effect. Okay. So now we take off this section. See what we got. That's great. Because the other two pieces of the tile were quite dark, I wanted this one to be a little bit lighter. So let's see how they compare. Now when you have the model on the base, I feel like these come together a little bit better. And they'll create a situation where with the effects and everything, it'll look very organic on the bottom. So now I'm going to mask off the very last portion. And then I'll show you how to do the blood effects with oil washes, which will flow nicely into the recesses that we created when we scribed the lines here. We'll just get one of those older pieces we used to cover up this last bit. Okay. Again, we're going to go back to the tissue. For this one, it's small, so I'm not going to worry too much about the grain direction. Just going to hit it however we can. Okay. Perfect. That's just what I wanted. Carefully peel off our other layers. Now it looks like ultimately that this one is a little bit too light. I am going to do just a little bit more of a pass on that one to kind of bring it into a somewhat more similar amount of texture than the rest of the panels. I like having some contrast, but I feel that in this case it might be a little bit too much. Okay. All right, let's go back for one last pass. I'm gonna stretch it left and right. This one's pretty thin, so I'm gonna do it a little bit more light. Do it heavier on the bottom, maybe a lighter on the top. We'll see how that comes out. Okay, perfect. That's just a little bit more texture and a little bit more interesting. Okay, now we've got the model the way we want it in terms of at least what we'll be doing with the airbrush. So I actually like at this point to glue the model to the base because I want to kind of create the blood effects to match the story of the model. So similar to how I did this one, I wanted it to be like this character has walked through the blood and that those pools are seeping into the cracks. So I opted to put less in front of the character other than where it's flowed through. And in the back, kind of have whatever they're walking away from, whatever the battle is. So I want to choose a similar orientation on this base. Now we have where we cut those lines, and we want to have it be kind of an interesting story. So I think that if we have the model on the base like this, then we get this neat corner here, right between his feet. And that'll allow us to kind of do some more storytelling and help us to be going in a direction that flows contrary to the angles that we've done in the line. And that'll make it a little bit more visually interesting. So at this point, I'm going to apply just a little bit of super glue to the feet of this model, which I completed in my last stream. You can check out the video. And we're going to position him just how we want. That's really nice. So we'll give him just a second. That super glue will act fast. And while that's drying, I'm just going to clean my airbrush really quick. As I said before, the technique I like to use is a pipette with water. To take even somewhat dirty water is okay and just flush back and forth with the pipette to help break up any particles of paint that have gotten stuck in the bottom of the airbrush. Then I like to wipe it out with a paper towel and my thumb, flush some out, then get some clean water and spray into a paper towel for a second. I dump out the paint, do one more pass, continue spraying, and if it looks clean inside, then I'm ready to put it to the side for the next step. Okay, so now we have our model completed on the base. But how do we do the blood effect? Well, I want to use two different techniques. So we're going to use a red oil wash that will flow into the recesses of these lines we scribed on the base. And also the oil wash will dry in a kind of dusty matte texture. This will make it look different from where piles of like gore, like a more wet. And so we're going to do those separately. The thicker wet gore will use Mod Podge Dimensional Magic and acrylic paint because they can work together. And then we'll use the oil wash initially to flow into those lines. So for oil washes, I have started using these little 3-ounce cups I got on Amazon. I was initially using glass containers, but they can be a little hard to clean. So this helps me kind of be more clear about that. So give me one second. Um, Collected quite a few oil paints. I was actually out of state a couple weeks ago, and it was really interesting. I was at a store and I've been getting into these oil washes, and I found that they had their model color oil washes on sale. I guess no one was buying them. So I picked up some really interesting colors. So I'm going to go ahead and get both a red and a black. And that will allow us to kind of get closer to the color that we want. So, see a question, what's this model's story? So, what's interesting about these models is that they're supposed to be these characters that really strive for like the ultimate perfection in combat and the things they like to do. And at the same time, they've kind of become corrupted and depraved. And so, what I want to do with the visual storytelling on these models is have it be that the blood effects don't appear on their armor. They're kind of their pride doesn't want to make it so that they get kind of marred by the blood of these lesser individuals they slay. But at the same time, the blood on the ground and around them shows the kind of depravity that they have succumbed to. And it's a subtle thing, but I think it's fun to contrast here the clean armor with this kind of messy style of base to kind of to give that feeling, even through the way we paint the model. So I'm going to start with some cadmium red, and then I'm going to add just a touch of black. I feel like the bright red is good, but it'll tend to be a little bit unrealistic. I think when you see like blood effects, often it'll be a little bit darker than what you'd anticipate. Because I feel like while blood can be bright red, kind of at the moment that it escapes from the body, it'll quickly start to darken. Um, I said this in my last stream, but if we're talking about oil washes, you'll want to make sure that you use a brush that's different than your normal hobby brush because the oil will stay in the bristles even if you use thinner and will kind of interact poorly with acrylics. So you want to have an oil brush and an acrylic brush. One second here. Excuse me. So what I do is I keep a couple brushes at the side that I use for oil. So we'll start out by we have this red in the cup. Then I have some mineral spirits that I have in this container. And I keep a separate pipette that I use for the mineral spirits as well. What's nice is that while they'll quickly take off the oil paint, they don't interact poorly with the acrylic paint or the pipettes. Lacquer thinner will eat through the pipettes. That can be kind of a challenge if you're using lacquer-based paints, which I do use sometimes. So what I found is that when you're mixing the oil paint, a big part of it is that it'll quickly seem like it's all dissolved, but there'll be chunks of the paint left. So you have to mix quite well. You'll notice here it's very thick. It's not running down the sides of the container at all. So I'm going to add a bit more thinner. We want to have it where when we touch it to an area like this, it's going to run somewhat liquidy. You'll see it run down the sides like that. I then keep some of the thinner in the pipette, and we can use that to clean our brush in between colors. So to take the brush I'm using, drop a little bit of the thinner on, and the thinner works very well, so it will clean up nicely. Now we've gotten the red off of the thinner, so we're going to take a little bit of the black, just a bit. This way we can kind of change the color of the red here. I'm not going to mix this fully because having this kind of color gradient just a little bit will feel more realistic than if we had a perfectly mixed color for this blood effect. So I'm going to go ahead and cap the oil paint, and then we'll get to applying it to the base. I'm going to check the consistency one more time. Yeah, it flows very nicely. So one thing I do like with my oil-based washes too, it's a little hard to see. If you use an older brush, sometimes it'll take on a quality like this, where the bristles will be uneven. But in this case, it's a good thing because you can tap just the edge of the longest section of the bristles to where you want the wash to flow out, and that will help it flow nicely without getting too much on the other surfaces. So now we will start from the back because I imagine that is where the model is coming from and where the blood will have started. And we just tap into the recesses here. Now the paint should flow through the cracks we created fairly well. If it doesn't flow super well, you can always add a little bit more thinner, which I do think I will add. You also have to control how much is on the brush. What's really nice about these two is that they're very easy to clean up because you can take a Q-tip with the oil wash and it will clean off any that you have spilled outside of where you want it without damaging the acrylic paint below. So if we get a little bit on the edges, it's okay. My goal is to fill those recesses of the places we cut while only leaving the kind of evidence of the blood behind the model. So I'm going to put a little bit more at the model's feet. And if you tap it on the side, you can actually get it to flow just around the edge of the foot. And this will actually kind of swarm around the foot, creating the effect that it's dripping as the model walks along. I'm going to put some more here at the back. This might be where we put the larger amount of like the gore. Okay. I think that will be good for the oil wash. We can always come back. It'll last quite a while before it dries. Just gonna clean up the area here. Now I'm gonna do what I was saying and clean up some of this area using a Q-tip. So we're gonna go get some more of the thinner, which I have a little bit left in here. And I'm just going to apply just a few drops till the edge of the Q-tip is saturated but not dripping. Then very, very lightly brush the top of the model here. We'll start to take down some of that color we had. The thinner will evaporate very quickly, so you kind of need to reapply as you do it. Okay. So now we have the blood effect, and we have a somewhat cleaner front, but the blood's still going through the edges of the grout. Now we're going to do the second part of the effect, which is to use Mod Podge Dimensional Magic, which I use for all kinds of things, especially bases that I want to have water effects without having to deal with resin. So I like to just put maybe a little piece of tape or something because we're not going to do too much of this substance, and it's very thick, so it won't run. So I'm going to apply some of this to the towel. And then I'm going to choose a bright red paint. My favorite red paint is Citadel's Corn Red. I'm going to shake that up. And then for this, we will use an acrylic brush, but I like to use a somewhat cheaper brush than my main detail one, because the Mod Podge is a little bit of a different formula. So I'm going to take just a bit of this paint, start mixing in some of the dimensional magic. So you can see it starts to become thick. It gains kind of a three-dimensional texture just a little bit. Okay. We don't need very much of this. And I'm just going to tap it along. And then what I'm going to do with this too is I'm going to add a little bit of black, just like we did with the oil wash. And then we're going to put this on top of the red dimensional magic that we've done. This will help kind of create a darker effect on top that'll make it more visually interesting. But it all won't be one color. I want to do a little bit on this side of the foot as well. Also, the texture of the dimensional magic makes it so that if you drag the brush down, actually create a streak, like maybe it's like skidded along on the foot or something. Okay, now I'm going to clean that off. Clean it in my dirty water. See, the dimensional magic does clean up really well on kind of your typical acrylic setup. Okay, so finally, we have our guy. The only thing left to do will be to paint the base rim, which we can do, and then he'll be ready to go with the rest of the squad and to join his companion here. So I'm going to carefully remove this piece of tape. Then for the base rim, I like to stick with my Vallejo black primer. Then I like to just apply it fairly quickly and evenly. And this is really my favorite part of the whole process because I feel that when you paint the base rim, everything just feels like it finally comes together. Make sure you get the edge of the polystyrene as well. That way you won't have any of that white showing. It'll look more natural. Okay. I do like to do two passes, so I'll wait a second and finish up. But now, compared to where we started, I feel as though this model's come a long way. I sometimes like to use my airbrush to hasten the drawing process. And that looks about good. So we're going to do one more pass, if that helps it. Yeah, that's looking smooth. I like to go a little bit thicker on the base rim. I think it doesn't matter too much, and I just want to make sure that the coverage is good and it's very solid. Obviously not chunky, but just enough to make sure we have this really stark black edge that contrasts with all of the work we've done on the base and really highlights the complexity of the base for the viewer. Okay. So now, 2 models done in this squad. Still got a lot left to go, but I think that this look for the Emperor's Children army I'm going for has made me very happy, and I like the way it's turning out. I like the storytelling we've been able to do in the bases, and I like the kind of duality that even comes through in the clean armor panels versus the skin that's been applied over the gun or the leg. This kind of uh, push and pull between this kind of like beauty and something abhorrent at the same time. And I think that really comes through in the models and the painting, and that was something I wanted to do. And it's nice to see it finally come together. Um, so I'm gonna go ahead and post this video. So if you want to make a base similar to this, you can access it. And I'll be streaming a couple times next week as well. So I look forward to seeing you there. Thank you.